Okay, so we are live now. So, good evening, everyone. I'm Akhila Mohan CG from tellmeyourstory.biz, and I welcome you all this evening for a discussion on the book An Unborn Desire. And I'm privileged to be in the company of the author Ananya Mukherjee. But before beginning today's session, let me tell you that tellmeyourstory.biz calls for registrations for the writing program season 5 in association with Rupa Publications. To participate in this writing workshop, you must register by 15th February. Now, let me begin with introducing our today's guest and author, Ananya Mukherjee. Ananya Mukherjee is a senior corporate leader based in Singapore. She is a former business journalist and acclaimed writer with more than 1,000 publications. After her first book, Ardha Satya, The Half Truth and Other Stories, Ananya published An Unborn Desire, a collection of 15 short stories. The book has received five-star reviews from the media, critics, and readers. Ananya has recently been honored with Sahitya Kosh Samman in 2022 for her book An Unborn Desire. Ananya is also a theatre actor, scriptwriter, and an active member of Open Stage, a group theatre based in Singapore. She is a flag bearer of the Tagore Society, Singapore. Her role as a 60-year-old in the short film Ilish won her a lot of appreciation. Welcome, Ananya.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Akhila.
Okay. So first, tell us that how did you decide the name of your book? Is there a story behind the title?
Yes, so the title story actually is called An Unborn Desire or The Unborn Desires. And that's how I wanted to name the book An Unborn Desire. So even before I go there, I think I should thank Tell Me Your Story and my publisher, Rupa Publications, for having me here. I'm really delighted to be here and to interact with our audience today, and of course, to have a conversation with you. So, yes, An Unborn Desire, as you said, it's kind of an uncommon, unusual title. I think the word unborn, we don't use it so
Yeah.
much. And because my first story or the title story, which is closest to my heart, is about an unborn, I wouldn't call it a desire, but an unborn relationship. That's how this title was inspired. So, does that
Right.
answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. So now tell us that a short story has a limited word space. And how different was it for you to sketch the characters and their conflicts within those limitations? Do you at all consider it as a limitation?
I don't think so. I think it's a challenge, and that's the
Right.
excitement of a short story. You can't just go on and on and on, right? You have to keep the reader really engaged. And
Right.
not that in a novel you don't keep the reader engaged, you have to keep the reader engaged in every chapter. But I think the
Right.
limitation, or the rather the challenge of, or the excitement of a short story, is that you are trying to put in a lot within a very small space. I mean, within
Right.
the short attention span, and probably a reading of 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and a story is done. And so you have to tell your story in those many words.
Right.
Creating a character, obviously, when you don't have you are not confined to a word limit, or you're not confined to a space, you can build characters.
Hmm.
It's a challenge again to take this and build a character and to be able to keep that character in the mind of the people even as they're reading that story, right?
Right.
Because you just have so much space, so much real
Right.
estate. Let's be, just a couple of
Right.
pages, and you have to build a character, you have to build a story around it. There has to be
Hmm.
a high, and then of course there has to be the most interesting part of a short story, which is the end. So it is more challenging than writing a longer script or a novel or a piece of work, which gives you the freedom to expand and talk about the various shades of a character.
Hmm.
Here, I think you just pick up a few shades of that character, few traits of the character, the ones that are most relevant to your story, and you
Right.
build on it. That's the trick of writing a short story and building your characters.
That was interesting. So your book gives people a tour to the Cape Town, Istanbul, Prague, and Egypt, and such like. So how has your travel really inspired your storytelling?
Oh, hugely, hugely. I'm an avid traveler,
Travel,
as
yeah,
probably the book tells you. I
yeah,
travel around the world both for work and for pleasure. And when I do that, I come across instances, characters, and anecdotes and cultural openness that I don't see anywhere else. I mean, if I were confined to my own room or my own city, I wouldn't have been exposed to that world. So
Right.
I think my book, particularly this one, has
Mm.
there are so many characters who I actually saw a glimpse of those characters in person. For example, the fakira. There's a
Okay.
story called the
Right.
fakir. Fakir in Morocco really existed, but he
Okay.
wasn't the one that I made him out to be.
Okay.
Again, going to Egypt, talking to the guide and the tour guide who had a master's in ancient Egyptian history, and he was telling me about a lot of things that we don't read in the books or we haven't read in history books. That kind of intrigued me, so I brought that piece in. So I think travel opens your mind to cultures, to people, to acceptance,
True.
to
Mm.
to be more open and
Yeah.
to realize that the world is beyond you, and
Right.
you just have to open your mind and embrace it all. And I think that is one of the things that's a key message of the book. The acceptance is the key message, and
Right.
I think that's what travels taught me.
Actually, it's. I think it's a very good way to find new stories through traveling.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And so, what kind of women's conflict do we see in your collection of short stories and Unborn Desire?
Lots, internal and external. So there are stories from all over the world, and not confined or restricted to a particular segment of the society. So there's this one woman who's a part of the title story. She's a high
Mm.
flying corporate, middle aged, lives a very urban privileged life, and she has her struggles, and her struggles are a lot more psychological. She doesn't have to think about what meal to serve to her family,
Hmm.
or about her physical protection in a world of males who are ready to exploit her. So
Hmm.
her struggles are more inner, and I've brought
Right.
that out.
Hmm.
Kind of struggles that urban women have. There is a
Hmm.
story of it's a historic reference to anarkali and the Mughal times, and how a woman, despite the, I would say, the crime being the same, or but a man would be judged differently and a woman would be judged differently.
True.
So there are those gender issues way back then. And there's similarly, I've talked about a village in Rajasthan where a woman actually has the struggle because she's an adopted child. She is dark skinned. She's from a different caste, and she is therefore easily, seen and wanted by people just like a commodity. But the villagers actually come to protect her. So that's a different story. I mean, she has a struggle, but there are people supporting her. I
Right.
think
Hmm.
I've portrayed stories from Kohistan, which is again a real story, and I mean a real news story. And there was a village in Kohistan where this is uh, remote parts of Pakistan where women were actually killed because they danced at a wedding ceremony. I think this was all over the newspaper, and
Hmm.
so they have their own set of struggles. So I think it's both. There's also a woman, a Dalit villager, who gets raped because she is a woman, and she is in the same hospital as she's isolated in a hospital because she's probably a COVID patient. So each of these struggles are different,
Hmm.
but the beauty of it is that I think women are extremely powerful, whether internally or the inner strength, or whether it is the outer strength that we learn
Hmm.
together. And to be honest and to be fair to the society, let's not just keep pointing fingers and saying, "Oh, but everybody stood against me." There are times when people stand with you because you have a voice.
That's
And
very true.
one of the stories, actually, the one about the Rajasthani village, Kulhara, is actually
Hmm.
putting that in front, saying that there was a time when in India, where which always gets targeted as a very unsafe place for women.
Hmm.
There were villages who abandoned an entire village and their livelihoods because they were trying to protect the modesty of a girl. So and that's a story. So I think it's a mix of both. psychological and physical, uh, the struggles that women have to go through.
Internally. That's right. So, in the title story, An Unborn Desire, Kabir, the male protagonist, discovers the secret of Kiara, the female protagonist. Do you think such discoveries are liberating for the women or they are distressful? Why do women keep such secrets? And or is it that men have secrets too but are more fearless about those?
I wouldn't say men are more fearless. I think women are ashamed of some of the things. When people keep secrets, they are either ashamed or they are in self doubt. They don't know how everybody else around will react to it. And I don't think secrets have anything to do with men or women. Both can have secrets and both can keep secrets. So, in fact, they say that औरतों के पेट में कोई बात नहीं बची. So it's just
Right.
the other way. So it's quite, the other way. So I think discovery of any secret can be both liberating because it's you're no longer carrying a burden on your back. It's all out
Right.
there. You deal with it,
True.
right?
Yeah.
So it's always liberating. You're not carrying any more burden, so you can fly higher. You can go higher and let the without the baggage. But of course, it can be difficult because if it's a secret that you didn't want to talk about, or if it's something that you've consciously chosen not to share with the world, you may feel vulnerable at the exposure,
True.
and nobody
Yeah.
likes to feel vulnerable. So I think that's an individual choice and how you manage to deal with it. But at the end of the day, it is liberating. It is definitely liberating. It's you no longer have to hide your diary. Isn't that enough,
Right.
right?
True. So you have donned multiple hats, be it of a corporate leader or a writer or a journalist, a theater artist, and a scriptwriter. How do you manage to strike a balance between all these roles? What is your usual writing routine like?
Okay, so I write. I love writing, and whether it is for corporate writing or whether it is, script or a short story or working on a theater script. So writing comes to me naturally like breathing. So I
Hmm.
spend at least a couple of minutes every day writing. It may not be something very deep or
Hmm.
reflective or something that I may use in any of my writing. It may not even be a planned writing, so to say that okay, I'm going to sit and write a story today. But I do write every day. So whether
Okay.
I rarely have writer's block, so to speak, wherein my mind is completely blank and I can't write anything. It's
Great.
generally because I think writing drives me rather than me driving the writing. So I wouldn't come and
Great.
sit and start writing because it's time to write. I would sit because there's something in my mind and I want to keep it. I want to put it down in paper. So that's the typical way of how my mind works. The other thing that I've found quite effective as a writer is sometimes you're too lazy to put things down. You're like, okay, there's something in your mind and you just don't know what to do with it, and you're not sure that's how you want to write. Everything's looking very, I think, amateurish or not so
Hmm.
polished at that stage. It's always a good idea to just talk about it, to record your own voice, or just to keep up, uh, just make an audio note of what you're thinking, because
It's a good
later
idea.
you can always go back to that, like,
Yeah.
okay, this was what I was thinking and maybe I can pick it up from there. So that's how I function sometimes, because I'm on a flight and I probably can't pull out my
Hmm.
laptop and put something down. I would probably just record and say, okay, this is what I'm thinking, and I need to mull over this and I need to write more. So
That's a very good idea.
it's
So,
easy,
don't you? Yeah. Please.
it's easy as well to
Yeah.
document. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. So don't you juggle with different kinds of writing, as you said that you have to do corporate writing also, short story and script writing. So how do you manage to, shift from one form of writing to another?
I think I've learned that trick quite well over the years. It's not easy because when
Hmm.
you are working you've been a business journalist for most of your life, most of
Yeah.
your career, and now it's half and half. You tend to be very fact based. You
Yeah.
tend to be, you
It's
want
very
to check
technical. Yeah.
very technical. You want to
Technical.
check
Yeah.
on everything. You want to have,
Right.
you tend to keep your creativity away, and you don't want to talk about a sky that's purple or pink. You want to talk about the sky is blue. What shade of blue? Okay, what
Yeah.
clouds are there? Are they cirrus or cumulus? You want to be
Yeah.
factual, right? But
Yeah.
when you're writing as a poet, when you're writing a poetry, you can think differently. So
Hmm.
there has been a conscious mental exercise that I do, and I think there are those areas of overlap where I sometimes write my fiction, and I am very tempted to go and do a fact check and say, hey, I need to exactly see how far is this place from there. Can a person really walk, in that distance? You have those inner, I think the bugs keep coming back to you. That So one way it helps because you are writing something that's also credible, uh,
Hmm.
when you're stating facts. But your creativity, I think you'll have to compartmentalize. You have to tell yourself, hey, this is not a report. This is not a brand proposition that I'm developing. This is something that's creative. And I want to take people on a journey, and I want to show them
Right.
that journey or the dream or that imagery. So it needs to make them feel like they're part of this beautiful painting and not just standing away and looking at numbers and graphs. So I think it's a tough one. I wouldn't say it's an easy
Hmm.
one, but I think over the years and I read a lot, so that kind of takes me. I
Okay.
read a lot of fiction, so that kind
Okay.
of helps keep that mind clean sometimes, from the kind of work, the corporate
Okay.
work that I do.
So, is there any next book in the making, or is there any particular theme or genre you are planning to write your next book on?
I'm just being super lazy, to be honest. It's like you've given birth to one child and you want to take a step back and
That's
say, hey, I would just want to keep
that's a
looking
great
at this
one.
child growing for a while before I even
Yeah.
think about the next. So that's what. But I I definitely want to do a novel someday, and I have been told that I don't do justice to my characters because they just finish in 5 pages. They are strong characters. They need to be out there telling a story on their own, and that's feedback that I've received, quite a strong feedback from a few of my readers. I think I will. My next project will be a novel, and I have some things
Okay.
in mind, but yeah, they're all over the place right now. Nothing so much. I might as well end up writing a cookbook because I love cooking,
Oh,
and a lot of
that's
my friends have been talking about traditional Bengali cooking. So it might end up doing something completely different from
yeah. That's again
anything
a
that
very
I've.
different. Yeah. That's again a very
It's a
different
very,
kind
very
of writing.
absolutely, yeah. And I don't even know how I'll do it, but maybe that's something that's going to kind of fill in the gap between the next one and this.
Right. So, what kind of books or genres do you like to read? As you said that you're an avid reader. So, which are some of your favorite titles, or say titles which have helped you in your writing journey?
I think the one book that I always quote is Jonathan Livingston Seagull,
Oh,
Richard Bach.
right.
It has taught me to
Mm.
fly. Honestly, it has taught me to live, and I think it has taught me so much that it reflects in the way I write, the way I am today. So that's a book. That's my Bible. I keep it on my bedside, and every time when I'm nervous or anxious or doubting myself, I go back to reading that book. So that's a book that I always go back to. I read everything. I just grab anything and everything. So I want to keep my mind open to reading everything,
Mm.
whether it's fiction or non-fiction or any genre, short stories, novels, all of that. I read a lot of scripts as well because I'm into theater. So different
All
kinds of
right.
writing. I read a lot of poetry. So I
Okay.
think keeping your mind open to saying, I'm going to read everything because there is something for me everywhere, right? Every author who's trying to tell a story. Yes, I'm a bit nitpicking about the authors I may want to go back to, but
Mm. Okay.
because of your experience with the first one. But
Right.
generally, I would say I read everything. So whether it's the Forbes magazine or reading or picking up a piece of the newest Booker or a piece of poetry, I read a lot.
Do you read in other languages as well? Like,
Yes, I do. So I read a lot of Bangla because that's my
okay.
native tongue. So I read a lot of Bangla, and I used to read a lot of Hindi, which I don't get to
Okay.
read now. In
Okay.
Singapore, it's quite rarely that I manage to
Hmm.
get a Hindi book. But yes, I read a lot of Bangla as well, Bangla literature as well.
So, how was your journey, publishing journey with Rupa Publications, and how was the editorial experience, and what value did such intervention add to your work?
Hugely, hugely. I think for every author, every struggling author who people don't know, or every newcomer, or first or second book, not many people know you. You don't live in that country. You live far away in some other country.
Right.
You're not in those circles where you meet with writers, or you have friends that you can talk to, bounce off ideas with. It is difficult to kind of even find a footing. So every author, every writer wants to be associated with a publisher. They have, start. I mean, my first book, I think, as a child, would have been a Rupa publication. I mean,
Mm.
it's
Mhm.
we've
Yeah.
seen Rupa from that. It's to
Yeah.
be
Right.
associated, to be linked to a publisher of that stature is, I think, an honor by itself. Uh, the journey, I would say, has been fantastic. So I am absolutely indebted to my mentor and editor, Beena Biswas, who's not a member of Rupa, but she has, she's works in collaboration with them. And she was the first person to have read my manuscript, and she said this needs to, go to a bigger, wider world. And for her to be trusting me and my work, and then when I was working with the Rupa team, whether it was the Bakar or the editorial team, I think they were fantastic. Such professional work, things turning around on time, very, very valuable feedback. I've been an editor myself in my
Okay.
previous
Right.
life, so I know, if the work is not well edited, it can be, no matter how beautifully you write, if there are typos and there are issues with
True.
editing, a piece of work becomes unprofessional. I mean, it looks
Right.
unprofessional. I think the amount of back and forth we did with the text, asking questions, even asking why are we doing this, why is this story. So it was fantastic. I think even ask basic questions like, do you really want it to be this way, and why? And then I had a chance to explain, and I was talking to people who were reading authors every day, who were able
Hmm.
to tell me, no, this is really good. I think this is really good. You should keep this. Or maybe look at that differently. So having that kind of counseling and support, and of course, once the book, it was cakewalk. It was a cakewalk. The whole publishing experience. And even after the book has been published, I am so grateful to the team for
Hmm.
constantly being there.
Right.
I'm not hiring, I have not hired any external agencies, nothing at all, because the team has been fantastic. They are so
Right.
supportive. And I think it's a blessing to be a part of such a wonderful family of professionals who know exactly what works. So yeah, I'm really grateful to the team.
That's really interesting, So, from being a reader of their books to being a writer. So, it's very interesting. So, now my last question that did your living in Singapore as an Indian author affect your writing or publishing dreams? Please tell us something about
Both ways. So I would say in Singapore, if I were to publish my book in Singapore, I wouldn't find a publisher, to be very honest. Because there are no big publishers who operate from Singapore. It's a very small country. We have
that. Hmm.
academic journals coming out, but we generally don't have a market for short stories, or a platform for short story writers. Uh, so it's a very small place, and my target audience for this book may not have been just Indians, but because the book has a very global outlook,
That's right.
so I did not just want to restrict it to the Indian audience, but I also thought that maybe, well, India is a huge market. India is massive,
Hmm.
and we know that people read.
Hmm.
In Singapore, there's a question mark about even the readership. So people don't generally read. Bookstores are closing, and it's sad. It's really sad because that's how things are moving. Like India, of course, I had this phase, having grown up in India and having been a reader all my life and seen books and bookstores and the way it's a blooming industry, it's a, in India.
Right.
So of course it had its pros and cons. I think the one thing, psychologically, it has opened my mind beyond one country, because I live outside and because I travel. So I can bring in stories that are probably slightly different from what we see right now in India. Um, Not because people are not capable, but because people have not had those experiences to be putting them down. May not have had those experiences. I think from a writer perspective, I don't think living in Singapore or anywhere else really mattered, because yeah, my
Hmm.
publisher was the publisher that I wanted to work with is the publisher I got, and they are based out of Singapore. So I think that's the bit. That's the Yeah. To be fair, that's how it was.
It was lovely talking to you, Ananya, and thank you for the very insightful conversation and for your time this evening.
Thank you so much, Akila, for having me here. Thank you.
Thank you. So, I would like to remind that tellmeyourstory.biz calls for registrations for the writing program season 5 in association with Rupa Publications. To participate in this writing workshop, you must register by 15th of February. So, write, read, share, discuss. Till then, stay well, stay safe, stay together, though distance. Good night.
Bye bye.